This video is called Jesus is an Anarchist, and you can find an essay of the same name by an individual named James Redford if you Google that, and I'm going to be using that for some reference here. And if I can't find the one reference that I suppose I'll start with the explanation of how the golden rule results in anarchism, and then my other main thing that I usually cite from the Bible is when Jesus told his apostles that basically that they shouldn't exercise authority over each other, and that basically that one quote by itself completely exposes the philosophy as being an anarchist. He's clearly an anarchist based just on that one statement to the apostles. But so the reason the golden rule results in anarchism logically is because, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily a Christian ethic. It's not solely a Christian ethic anyway. It doesn't originate there. I'm not saying any of that stuff, but I'm saying that the teachings of Jesus are consistent with that rule, regardless of where it came from. And I think it's a good rule because it's basically ethical consistency. You know, treat others as you would be treated yourself. So don't do things to other people that you don't want them to do to you. I mean, like, whether you consider yourself a Christian or not, like, pretty much everybody understands that, and you know, they agree with that. I mean, it's obviously you don't want to be a hypocrite, and you shouldn't be advocating a double standard in behavior for obvious reasons. And well, if those reasons aren't obvious, they're because you're basically saying other people can, or you should be able to do to people, and what they're not allowed to do to you, and things like that. And you're just a hypocrite. You know, the whole point of that is hypocrisy is a double standard. So he quotes Matthew 5:17-18 in this essay. He says, do not think that actually the more important one is Matthew 7:12. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So, and he says, see also Luke 6:31. So he's basically using that as the golden rule, and treat others as you would be treated, and so on. So anyway, now the reason that this is necessarily anarchism is because the government, by definition, and this isn't some radical notion here, this is the standard view in so-called political science and political theory and things, is that the state has rights that nobody else does. People don't usually articulate it that way, but if you ask them those questions, they'll kind of act like you're absurd for even asking that. Like, of course it does. Like, that's the basis of what a state is. And yeah, they're right about that. In theory anyway, the state has rights that no one else does. In reality, it's not the reality of the situation, but it is the reality of the belief that they hold. So, by definition, a government is an organization that says it's the only one allowed to do certain things, and the people believe it is really the main part of the problem of it all. But the people en masse or in large amounts believe this, and they allow the state and don't punish the state for doing things because they think the state has the right to do things that they don't. So things that they view as crime, if they did it, are not viewed as crime. And the most obvious examples would be taxation. All states say that they're the only ones allowed to tax, and if anybody else tries to tax their criminals, they're right in the sense that if you try to tax your criminal, the problem is that they don't understand that taxation is criminal by even the definition of what extortion and taxation are. What those definitions are, I mean, they're the same thing, using different words, but by definition, all governments do that. If they didn't do that, they wouldn't be the state. And so the main teaching, basically, or the main philosophical principle that most people attribute to Christianity, or at least say Christianity revolves around, is completely inconsistent with the entire notion of a government itself. So, I mean, you really don't have to go any further beyond that in explanation. The next step is for the individual listening or thinking about this to follow the logic through and follow the situations in real life and what would happen, and if someone disobeyed this and that and the other thing, and how taxation works. And I'm fairly certain you'll come to see that is the fact of the matter. So just based on that, Christianity, if that is a main tenet of it, must necessarily be against all statism, because a state is inherently a double standard in behavior. But, so I'm going to look up the other one. 1 second. So I just Googled Jesus authority, not so with you, and it takes you to Matthew 20:26, and it's actually 25 where he starts it. So Matthew 20:25. Let me click back here on this page. It's on BibleHub.com. I mean, it's fairly easily accessible. I mean, if you're on YouTube and for some reason can't Google this, I'm sure you could find a Bible that has some variation of this translation in it, and some are a little bit more direct than others. This is taken from, it's going to be taken from the New International Version, if Matthew 20:25 would load right now. But basically he says, calls them together and he says, you know, the rulers of the Gentiles exercise authority over them and lord it over them and so on. And he says, not so with you. Here, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. 26, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. 27, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. And, you know, I think that's a little bit more rhetorical there. I mean, I would assume Jesus doesn't actually believe in slavery. He means, you know, whoever wants to become great amongst you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. So he's saying, you know, I mean, basically he's saying don't exercise authority over each other, but serve each other. And not, you know, he's not saying to go enslave people and that he have to be your slave. You know, I mean, maybe he was, which would be interesting, but given the nature of the entire philosophy as espoused by Jesus, according to the Bible, his alleged words, you know, that doesn't make any sense. He's clearly just saying if in order to be great, you have to serve your fellow man. And, you know, but this is not a rationalization for democracy, which it could easily be used, right? Public servant and all this. Because people believe that government is our servant. So naturally they would probably believe that, well, that means government should be our servant. But the problem is that he says, do not exercise authority over each other. So that necessarily rules out the concept of a state or government, because that's basically what the belief is the state is authority and the state is exercising authority. And you know, if anybody would deny that, that's the entire idea. The same with the double standard of the state ethically, with the two different codes of conduct through taxation and just anything in general. I mean, you know, if the state says something is illegal one day, they put you in the cage for it, and then, you know, the next day it's no longer a crime, they declare. And now what? Now these people were victims. Do they ever make any, you know, restitution towards these people who they're basically admitting that they victimized? Of course, in their mind, they weren't victimizing them when it was called illegal, because you weren't supposed to have it. And then today, now it's okay to have it, or now today it's okay to have it, and tomorrow it's not. So, you know, we're not victimizing you, even though you apparently had the right to do this yesterday. So it's just the entire idea itself cannot logically live up to that. There's always going to be some strange contradiction that comes about due to the inherently self-contradictory nature of the belief in government. And I mean, aside from that, the main point, I guess, is just that by definition, a state is a group that's imagined to have the right to do things that nobody else is, or that it would be immoral if other people did, unless it was called legal, as if that mattered. But so, I mean, those basic quotes right there, which are, you know, the first one is really pretty much fundamental to the entire philosophy of Christianity and the teachings of Jesus. And, you know, it's completely inconsistent with the double standard of statism. And the second one, I mean, he's outright saying, don't exercise authority over others. You know, if you want to be great, you must serve people, you must help them, and so on and so forth. So, you know, and that's not what authority is. He clearly understands that. You know, they exercise authority, not so with you. He understands that authority in government, and this is not a servant, because he's drawing that distinction between authority and being great, and being a servant is how you be great, you know. So exercising authority is not being a servant, it's being a ruler. And clearly Jesus understood this through that distinction. And so that's the 10-minute video and explanation on how Jesus was an anarchist. I mean, it's pretty obvious, I would think, if you just actually read these words.